Hey guys, Tom here from the Investing with Tom YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk about how you can buy the same stocks as Warren Buffett. So how cool would it be if you could call Warren Buffett and see what stocks he was buying and selling? Well, if he did take your call, he probably wouldn't tell you, but unfortunately for him, he does legally have to tell the SEC what stocks he is buying and selling each quarter, and that's actually publicly available information that you can go and look up. You can go and see what stocks Warren Buffett has been buying through his holding company Berkshire Hathaway and what he's been selling, and you can see that information updated on a quarterly basis, and it's a really powerful tool for the investor to get ideas and see what great investors are out there buying and selling, what companies they're getting into, what companies you should maybe be researching as well, and what companies they're getting out of, and maybe which ones you should be thinking of exiting if you do have an investment in that company. So this is something called a 13F filing. And a 13F filing is something that every fund, in the United States it is, every fund with a value greater than $100 million has to submit each quarter. And like I said, it's basically a record of what they've bought and sold in that previous quarter. All you have to do to track these down is literally search 13F filing and then the investor's name or the fund's name that you're wanting to look up. So if you're wanting to look at what Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett have been doing in the previous quarter, you can literally just type into Google 13F Warren Buffett and you'll be either taken to the SEC website, or there's a few other websites out there like Whale Wisdom and a few others that you're likely to track down that'll give you that information as well. So next, let's get into some tips that I found really useful for making the most of this information when it comes to your own investing, and making it as helpful as possible for generating returns, because essentially that's what we're here to do at the end of the day, is to invest some money and turn it into even more money and kind of rinse and repeat. So not all 13F filings are going to be useful. Obviously Warren Buffett has probably the most viewed 13F filing out of anyone you could ever find, but there are a few other really good investors out there that you should definitely be watching. And there's a few great and there's a few great investors that you probably might not want to pay as much attention to, even if they are generating really good returns. You might not want to pay as much attention to them if their strategy differs from yours a little bit. So I'm going to stick this whiteboard back on the wall and I'll be back with you in a sec. Okay, so here are my top tips for looking at 13F filings, what to look for, what to steer clear of if you do come across, and I'm also going to give you a few names of people that you may be interested in following as well. So the first thing I'm going to look for is few companies. So what I mean by few companies is essentially I want to follow really successful investors that only buy a small number of companies, as this suggests. So the vast majority of mutual funds and fund managers out there buy, they're heavily diversified across a large number of companies. That's not my strategy, that's not Warren Buffett's strategy. That's not the strategy of several very successful investors. The strategy of investors who know what they're doing is to buy a small number of really solid companies at a great price. So the first thing you want to look out for is investors that buy just a small number of companies. Off the top of my head, I think Warren Buffett has something like 80% of his public investments in about 5 stocks. So he's dealing with literally in the hundreds of billions of dollars and only has 5 companies. And if you're investing 10 grand or 50 grand or whatever it is, there's really no reason, unless you don't know what you're doing, that you need to, there's really no reason to diversify massively if you know what you're doing. So the first thing I'm looking for is someone that's buying a low number of companies. If Warren Buffett was out there buying 200 companies and he bought Apple, probably no one would particularly care. At this point, I think Warren Buffett has about 20+% of his portfolio on Apple, so that's when people start really paying attention. So that's why I'm looking for someone with few companies. Let's get to number 2. Number 2, value strategy. So if you've tracked down an investor that invests in only a few companies and has significantly sized positions in those few companies, you've probably also tracked down someone who uses a value strategy, value investing type strategy. Essentially, value investing is all about trying to buy a dollar for 50 cents. If you find something that you think is significantly underpriced versus what it's intrinsically worth, you can generate very, very high returns quite quickly. So I'm looking for someone that has a value strategy, and by going through this process, I'm looking to kind of build a list of people that follow this strategy and people that invest in quite few companies. So what I don't want to do is, this is just me personally, what I don't want to do is invest in or follow people in this type of 13F filing, copycat investing type strategy. I don't want to follow people that don't fit my strategy. Personally, I'm a value investor. I'm looking to buy a dollar for 50 cents. So I don't want to be out there following people that invest in super high PE, super high growth companies. It's just not my strategy. That's too much risk personally for me to handle. I think you can get a lot lower risk with a value strategy, and I also think you can generate higher returns with a value investing strategy. So those are the types of people I'm looking for. So let's get into number 3 and the third and final tip when you're looking through 13F filings. My third and final tip for looking at 13F filings is figuring out how invested are they. And this is a lot of times easier said than done. So unfortunately, one of the things that a 13F filing doesn't include is the overall size of the portfolio. It'll definitely tell you how much of the portfolio is invested. So if they're buying shares in public companies, that's exactly what the 13F is there for, is to tell you what they bought and sold and what they currently own. But what it doesn't show is how much an investor actually has in cash. So for example, at the moment, Warren Buffett has about a little over $100 billion in cash, yet his public holdings, I believe, are only in about the $200 billion range. So my numbers, again, might be slightly out there, but he's roughly about a third cash at the moment. And that's easy to see for Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, because Berkshire Hathaway itself is a publicly traded company, and they release that information on their financial statements. But that's not the case for the vast majority of investment funds. So what you really want to figure out, if possible, is how invested are they, and how much of these great investors, how much of their assets are actually in cash, because that's going to be a big indication of what you should probably be doing as well. If Warren Buffett thinks the market's overvalued and he can't find good investments, there's probably a pretty good reason for that. The number one reason he has that I don't have is size. So he's investing in enormous companies. I've got a lot more companies available to myself personally because I'm investing much smaller amounts of money, and I'm sure pretty much everyone else watching this video isn't a billionaire as well. So you're probably in the same boat. So how invested are they? Great question to ask. With Buffett, easy to see. With other funds, it's a little bit harder to see. And one of the other things that this 13F filing also doesn't show is any short positions. So if a company is, or if an investor is shorting a stock, that's not going to be included in a 13F filing. So those are just things to be aware of. If you are familiar with roughly the size of the overall portfolio, including cash of any of these really good investors, that's a great thing to keep in mind, so you can kind of track roughly where you think their cash position is sitting, and you can figure out how invested are they. So to finish off this video, I'm just going to give you a list of 3 or 4, however many I can come up with off the top of my head, of the favorite. So I hope you've enjoyed the video so far. Those are my top tips for looking at 13F filings, and if you have enjoyed the video so far, please drop me a like and subscribe. But before we finish the video, I'm just going to give you my top investors that I follow personally and review their 13F filings quarterly to try and get ideas for investments. Hopefully you've got your own lists out there, or can get your list together once you've kind of watched the rest of this video. And I'd love to hear of any investors that you follow that I've missed as well. So let me clear the board and let's get into it. I'll give you a list of some really good, really successful investors who've generated massive rates of return that you should be following as well. So if you don't know who Li Lu is, Li Lu for a long time was sort of a hot contender to take over from Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway once Warren Buffett passes away, essentially. So Warren Buffett is a Chinese immigrant to the United States. He's very close with Charlie Munger in particular, and he's compounded money at about 30% a year for decades now. So Li Lu again runs a fund, pretty similar kind of story to Mohnish Pabrai at the moment. He doesn't have a lot, if any, I think, investments in the US at the moment. He may still have a small holding, but he's doing a lot of investing in China over the last couple of years. Again, Li Lu's a great one to follow. If you do see any activity in Li Lu's portfolio in the States, I would start to get very excited as well. And my final investor that I'm going to recommend you follow is a guy by the name of Guy Spear. And I really hope I've spelt Guy's name correctly just there. I think I have. I've actually got Guy's book on the to-read list over in the bookshelf here. So Guy Spear is another phenomenal investor. In his book, I am yet to read it, like I said, but essentially he used to be a Wall Street kind of modern portfolio type guy, hotshot hedge fund manager type Wall Street guy, and turned into a value investor and moved away from sort of the hustle and bustle of Wall Street. Great investor, again, value type strategy, really successful investor as well, generated high rates of return, and a good one to follow. So that's all from me on copycat investing and 13F filings. It's a great tool for the small investor. I hope you'd enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of that video. If you did, drop me a like, subscribe, comment. Love to hear from you and love to see you next time as well. But that's all from me for today. Cheers.